sometimes on a pile of ashes, or sometimes by the will of others in a palace on a first-class bed with pillows. See that word Kashipu? We're familiar with that, aren't we? Hiranya Kashipu. There used to be some Krishna stories tapes, and the recitation of the appearance of Lord Nrsingadev was there. It was very cleverly done in a rhyme form. For example, and it won't be long before Lord Nrsingadev's appearance is coming, actually. May, I think. So Hiranyakashipu introduces himself to Lord Brahma. He does these austerities for 10,000 years or something like that, is it? Or more. And he says, Brahma, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Hiranyakashipu. Hiranya means gold, Kashipu means bed. Grant me this boon, Brahma, that I never fall dead. And of course, when we hear what we think, well, Brahma doesn't need an explanation of what Hiranya means in English or what Kashipu means. But for the sake of the the poetic flow, and it's very expertly written. So we have 3 verses here, 2 without purport, and the final one with purport. And the same, that one purport is covering all these verses. And the point made in the second verse is, according to my destiny, and I'm fully satisfied and unagitated. So at the beginning of the purport, Prabhupada talks about different types of birth. The learned Brahman's description indicates different types of birth, for one lies down according to one's body. So this is this can be understood also. Brahmanda Konya Bhagavani Jeev Guru Krishna Prasadi Pai Bhaktilata Bij. The living entity is wandering through so many different species of life. And finally, we get a human form of life, which gives us the opportunity for much sense enjoyment, or we can take the opportunity for spiritual realization. And so Krishna, he gives us plenty of indication and caution in the Bhagavatam. Bhogeshwaya prasaktanam tayaparita chetasam. For the one who wants to be ikiha, or single-pointed in their determination, then we have to make sure that we don't become attached to bhoga, sense enjoyment, and aishwarya, opulence. In the first canto, Srimad Bhavagatam, in one of the purports, Prabhupada says that even the most stalwart devotee can fall victim to wealth in women, or wealth in men, or whatever happens to be your attraction these days. So typically, if one has wealth, then they want to enjoy it. And you can't really enjoy it on your own. We see some people who were extremely wealthy. If I'm wrong, someone can correct me, but I think it was a chap called Howard Hughes who became very, very wealthy. But he wasn't very happy. At the end of his life, he was such a germaphobe that he didn't have any contact with anybody. So his wealth, he couldn't enjoy with anyone else. So usually, if you have wealth, it means you want to enjoy. The king may have a kingdom, but he needs a queen. Or if you have a partner, then you want wealth so that you can enjoy. So both go hand in hand, the Bhoga Aishwarya. But here, this learned Brahmin is being seen to be unattached because he's fully satisfied and unagitated, whatever comes his way. he's accepting it as his destiny. And Lord Brahma, he's also indicating, or he's advising us that be satisfied with whatever comes our way and tolerate. Krishna's also saying tolerate the happiness and distress, not just the distress. It's quite important to us to learn how to tolerate distress because we don't want to suffer. And that's natural. Prabhupada said an intelligent person doesn't like to suffer. And that's also supported in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says that an intelligent person will seek out the sources of suffering and mitigate those sources. So this requires a bit of courage to see what is the cause of my suffering and to do something about it. Too often, then, people want to blame others for the cause of their suffering, but as the old Scottish bard said, what's for you will no go past you. Rabbi Burns. So that is the case. If it's for us, then it'll come to us. Then there may be the secondary cause, which is like someone may have said or done something to us. But the primary cause is that we did something in the past and the reaction's coming. So back to this, Lord Brahma says that if we tolerate that all the while continuing with our devotional service, then all the reactions are being burned up. And in due course of time, when all the reactions are burned up, all that will be left is pure devotional service, which is our rightful inheritance. It becomes our rightful inheritance. So we shouldn't allow ourselves to become distracted as to comparing ourselves with other people as being greater or less, or being overly concerned with someone else's status in devotional service. This is can be a trick of Maya. Oh, look at that one. How can I be expected to be a devotee? Look at that one. It doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. And Prabhupada says, don't be surprised who leaves. Krishna consciousness, be surprised who stays. So everyone's a devotee. Everyone who's aspiring to be a devotee is making great sacrifices. We all have the ability with this human form of life. There's so much potential to do good or harm for ourselves or for others. But one who's actually, there's a movement now called woke, but the real woke is Jeev Jago. Lord Chaitanya wakes us up to who we really are, not just being woken to some political or humanitarian things, but the real woke is to realize that we're all spirit souls and we have the equal opportunity to go back to Godhead. If we get caught up in so many arguments in the material world, that will keep us here. And there's examples where Prabhupada said that leave it to them. For example, there was a devotee who was asking about conservationism, and he said, leave that to them, just go back to Godhead. So that doesn't mean to say we don't care about the planet or the environment. What it means is there's other people who can take care of that. That's their interest. They're planning to remain here. They want the material world to be a nicer place because they're planning to stay here. But the devotees aren't making plans to stay here. So make your plans to get out of here. If you're planning to get out of jail, then you don't think, well, let me just make this super nice cell. If you're thinking, well, I'm going to be getting out in a few weeks, I don't need to spend too much time making this super nice because I'll be leaving it. That's your intention. Of course, while we're here, we respect Krishna's creation, and that is there in the pages of the Ishopanishad, to accept our quota and accept other people have their quota. Hari Prabhu asked him about envy, and he said that Prabhupada said envy, everything can be used in Krishna's service, but envy must be given up. He said envy is not very practical. Like, say, someone happens to have the karma which allows them a lot of material facilities. Being envious of them doesn't improve our karma, that we get what they have. And similarly, if someone is suffering, then we can try to help them in their suffering. That is the nature of the compassionate devotee. But ultimately, everything has its time. We are not in control. Krishna is in control. And if Krishna is not directly taking control, then the modes of material nature which Krishna has set in motion is taking control. So this verse in the text 40 during the purport, Yantra Rudani Mayaya, that the living entity is seated as on a machine made of material energy. So this is quite similar to the other example Krishna gives in Bhagavad Gita, with the 5 senses, the 5 horses, the reins, the driver, and the chariot. And the spirit soul, when the intelligence is lost, then the spirit soul is in a very dangerous position. If you can imagine being on a chariot with horses which are wild and you have no control of them, you don't know. You can be sure that the destination is not going to be, when you terminate the journey, it's not going to be very peaceful. It's going to end up in disaster. So this is the nature of uncontrolled senses. People want this freedom to be uncontrolled, but that freedom, or so-called freedom, is actually going to lead to further bondage. But the devotees who have heard this message of Bhagavad Gita, they know that the regulative principles are there not to restrict us blindly, but for a purpose. They're there for us to regulate ourselves so that the mind can become focused on chanting the holy names. These are conducive principles. If they weren't required, they wouldn't be mentioned. And it's develop the qualities, Brahminical qualities, such as, can anyone mention any of the 4 Brahminical qualities? So there's 4 religious principles which the Brahmins go by. Mercy and austerity. Yeah, so they directly correlate with the 4 regs. So cleanliness, against cleanliness is sex life. So cleanliness, mercy, truthfulness, and austerity. These are the 4 pillars of religion and 4 Brahminical principles as well. Of course, if we read the principles of the characteristics of a Brahmin, as the Hoksha says, peacefulness is one of them. So there's many other qualities as well. But these 4 essential religious principles are there. Mercy, that is destroyed by animal slaughter. One can't position himself as being in knowledge and being compassionate while allowing animals to be killed unnecessarily, unrestrictedly, for the pleasure of the tongue. And intoxication, what does that destroy? Austerity. Funnily enough, though, when people become intoxicated, they seem to be able to do so many austere things, like going about in the city centre in the dead of winter with just a thin T-shirt on, totally drunk. But it does have its consequences. I remember about maybe 12 years ago, it was a really, really cold winter. It was like -17 one night or something. And there were people dying, coming home from the pub at night. One boy was walking back from Ayr and he just had his trendy clothes on, but he never made it home a couple of miles. And somebody made a mistake with the type of salt for the road. They got the wrong stuff. They saved some money. There was cars stuck on the motorway overnight, people dying in them. This was so anyway. when one becomes intoxicated, generally they don't necessarily want to be employed. They become lazy, they become dirty, stuff like that. So it's because intoxication is a mode of ignorance, so the rest of the mode of ignorance qualities follow from that. And gambling, truthfulness, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, of gambling I am the cheats. So if someone is gambling and they see an opportunity to win by cheating, then quite often that will happen. The fact that one is gambling, I don't know, do we find many honest gamblers? And of course, we're hearing that the big gamble is actually gambling with this human form of life, especially when becoming knowledge. Then we have to do something about that knowledge. With that knowledge comes a responsibility, a personal responsibility to do something with our human form of life. And there's so much potential in the human form of life. There's so much we can do. We can see in history, sometimes people, they lead a nation to war and they create so much havoc. But alternatively, we also have the potency to do so much good. And the highest good we can do is to be Krishna conscious, to be a devotee, and give that Krishna consciousness message to others. And when they start to take to it, then we help to cultivate that Krishna conscious fire in them. And by cultivating that fire within them, also ours is cultivated simultaneously. So this is why preaching is the essence, because this is such an important part of Krishna consciousness. So there's many wonderful machines in the form of different species of life, and the living entities traveling through many of them. And finally, when we become frustrated, we turn to God and we pray to God, and then God may give us some, according to our sincerity, if we're really serious and we want to make a change and we want to figure out, we really want to know, why am I here? Why am I suffering? What is the best benefit in life? Then Krishna, he sees the wandering of living entity. Many, many births both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, whereas you cannot. So Krishna knows all our past births. He knows our journey. And he gives us opportunities to take the steps forward. So we look back in our life and we see how we came to Krishna consciousness, and there was many hints and favourable breezes which brought us here. And sometimes those favourable breezes may not have seemed pleasant at the time, and even now, sometimes this favourable breeze is blowing, but we're not seeing it because we want to go in another direction, but Krishna is pushing us in a certain direction. This is sometimes like the tough love of a parent. And so what people want to, they want to talk about love, but and they talk about love of God. But first we have to align ourselves with the will of the Lord. And then he will gradually begin to reveal himself more and more. So this word yantra rudani, so body made as like a machine made of material energy. So it's interesting. There's one video I seen back in the Sankatan House quite a few years ago. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. If anybody knows the name of the video, they can say, but it's, I think it was made by the Bhaktivedanta Institute. If not, then it's certainly aligned, but it was showing the inside of a cell, how complex it was. So back in the day when Darwin was around, which was 18 something or other, then they had the ability to see through microscopes and telescopes and see a certain amount of the universe, and out there in the universe inwards through the microscope, the microcosm, you've got the macrocosm outside and the microcosm inside. And they had the ability to see cells, but what they seen was just a blob, a little white blob. And as their scientific advancement progressed, then they had much more powerful microscopes, and then they can see the actual composition of a cell. And it's so complex, and all the parts are interdependent, that they can't fathom how it could come into being by evolution. All the parts have to be there simultaneously for the cell to function as a cell. So therefore, the honest scientists, they term intelligent design. But those who want to deny God at all costs, they will deny it, and then they'll come up with the reason later. So this is just exactly like the scissors and the knife story. I think we all know the scissors and the knife story. The two men were arguing how to cut the cloth. One says knife is better. One says scissors is better. No knife, no scissors. No, scissors is rubbish. Knife is better. And then they start fighting. And then as they're fighting, they end up in the river. They fall into the river. One's drowning the other. And as he's drowning him, then above the water comes the hands, and he goes like this. No, he's dying. He's been drowned, and he won't even agree for the sake of preserving his own life. So this is the nature of, even though the evidence is there daily, they're seeing the wonders, the miracles of the universe which Krishna has created. And even through their own investigation, they're seeing things which they don't understand. Then still they won't accept. So this is Asuram Bhavam Ashrita, professed atheists. So even though the evidence may be there, because they have a strong desire because of the strong envy against God, then their natural position is antagonistic towards God, or anyone who believes in God, or anyone who tries to promote God. But for them, Prabhupada said God will be, they'll see God as death when he comes and takes everything away. You can see there's a video of Prabhupada speaking. I don't know if it was it New York that had the rooftop garden, or was it LA? New York, I think it was maybe the original temple they had. They had a rooftop garden on skyscraper flats or something. Anyway, they were on top of, you could see by the video, they were on top of a rooftop garden in some skyscraper. And devotees always like to bring like eminent philosophers, scientists, or important people, or people who are considered important in human society. And they're sitting there quite smug, saying, oh, well, we don't really believe in God. And Prabhupada just starts laughing. He says, you may not believe in God, but that does not mean he does not exist. But for you, God will come in the form of death and take everything away. And then the camera shows a face. He's not looking quite so smug. He says, that for you will be God. And this is the name also, Hara. Just like one person was saying the other day, there was a takeaway called Hara Takeaway, which is quite funny, but although it would be nice if it was a prasadam takeaway. So for the devotee, Prabhupada quoted this regarding himself. Now, he tried so many different ways to maintain a family, etc. But when he found himself later on in life at the Radha Damodar temple, retired from family life, He said, all that's left is a list of names. And they quoted this verse that when the Lord looks favourably upon someone, then they take everything away from them and they make that person the most wretched person in society. So then Krishna's kindness is that he removes our connection where we don't really see any future back in the material world again. For a devotee to go back, it's called Vantasi Sannyasi, which sounds like a nice rhyming word, but it's not a very nice prospect. You know, if typically if someone eats something which is unhealthy or it's troublesome for the body, then we throw up. Sometimes we even we create that vomiting ourselves. Sometimes people stick their fingers down the throat to vomit because there's some upset in the stomach. And Sati was saying this when her father Daksha offended Lord Shiva. Then she used that analogy, said, when you eat something which is makes you sick or which is poisonous, then the best thing to do is throw up. So because of this body which is given to me by Daksha, I find this connection with him so unpalatable, then the best thing to do is to give it up. So by her mystic power, she was able to ignite her body and give it up, and thus became the sati rite, which was something which was a heinous thing imposed upon Hindus at one time. When the husband died, the wife would be forced into sati rite. But the idea was, and sometimes we see this in the Bhagavatam as well, that the wife is so devoted to the husband that it's more painful for her to live than to enter into the funeral pyre of her husband. But this should not be done. It should not be imitated. This would be disastrous. So this Vantasi Sannyasi means that we have seen something which was, we've experienced material life and we've given it up. We've vomited it, we've thrown it up, we've given it up. And we've become a devotee, and we're attempting to become a devotee. But if we once again go back to it, then it's considered to be eating our own vomit. So therefore, sannyasi, it means renunciation, and vantasi means that we're just going back to what we've renounced. But in the varnashram system, sometimes we see even in ISKCON, and the history is there, that sometimes someone takes sannyas and then they give it up because perhaps they bit off more than they could chew. It's been described that taking sannyas is like holding your breath underwater. It's okay at first, but it gets a bit more difficult as time goes on. That's only, I guess, if you are actually not of a sannyas nature. But even when that happened in Prabhupada's time, then he didn't make a big deal of it. He says, okay, just go back to your wife and carry on with your devotional service, because the jiva and devotional service is the constant thing. The varna and the ashram is temporary. So one might be a brahmachari, there might be grihasta for some time, there might be vanaprastha, there may be sannyasi. And Lord Chaitanya says this, before the devotees do puja, then they approach the Lord. The purpose of this verse is to approach as the mood of a servant, not decorated or conceiving ourselves to be of a particular ashram or social standing. Naham vipro nachana raptir napi vaishona sudar naham varnicha grahapatana avator yatirva kinti proja nikala pramanan purnamritabdir gopi bhaktu padakamalayur dasa das and das. So basically, I probably didn't get that verse right. It's a while since I've said it. But Naham vipro, vipro means Brahmin. Grihapatir. I'm not a Brahmin, I'm not a householder. So all these different things, neither am I any of these ashrams, but I'm eternal servant of the Lord. In fact, dasa, dasa, nudas. I'm not even the servant of the Lord directly, or the Lord's servants directly, but I'm servant of the servant many times removed. And this is a good thing. In the material world, if someone is in the bottom of the rung, they just think, I need to get to the top. Just like that time Prabhupada went to Dai Nippon with, it might have been Tamal Krishna Goswami on this occasion. And they were waiting to meet the chief executive. And before he came in, the man's understudy was there. He had shown them into the office. And Prabhupada said to the man, so what is your ambition? And he took his card, his business card, and he put it on top of the boss's. So that means he wanted to be the top dog. So this is natural. But in the material world, everyone wants to be the top dog. But be in the spiritual world, then it's in the spiritual life, then it's all the healthy situation for a devotee is to consider oneself a servant of the servant. And this is a great test for us, because sometimes we think, well, I don't mind serving this one, but I'm not serving that one because he's an Egypt, or whatever else comes up in our mind. If you don't know what Egypt means, it means idiot. Or we have some personal interaction with devotees we don't like, so we decide we're not serving them. But this is a test for us to overcome our own envy of Krishna. Ultimately, that has to be given up, Prabhupada said. And in this way, we can become satisfied. And so the point in the verse 39 was, this Brahmin was fully satisfied and unagitated. Now that sounds like a very nice place to be, doesn't it? And if we follow in the footsteps of the previous acharyas, and we follow these teachings, then that's our destination as well. As we become disassociated with this body and this world and everything it has to offer, then we become satisfied simply by hearing and chanting and serving. I was just reading, the Prabhupada says, in the material world, people become they become exhausted, by their work. But in the spiritual world, people become enthused. So there's one devotee, Tribhuvanath, he passed away some years ago, but he was such an example of enthusiasm. He was like enthusiasm personified. When he started the kirtan, most people, when they started, they build it up, but he would just be full pelt. And it wasn't the mode of passion. He was just always at full enthusiasm mode. It's like someone put the switch on at max and it just stuck. Whatever he was doing, it was done with full enthusiasm. And there's many wonderful stories about this devotee. For example, the story of him driving a single-decker bus down the motorway for 15 minutes, fast asleep with his head tilted back, and the police car trying to draw his attention. And they were very angry with him. They had the sirens going and the lights flashing, peeping the horn, pulling in front of him. Nothing worked. He was fast asleep. And they were very angry with him, and they were going to throw the book at him. But when it went on for some time, they were just awestruck, thinking they'd never seen such a thing before. Somebody up there must be actually looking after him. Finally, they stopped him, and they didn't charge him with anything. They just said, please go and take rest. Obviously, you're very dear to somebody up there. Because he was such enthusiastic devotee, always setting up festivals and doing so many different preaching programs. And even though he was a Prabhupada disciple and very enthusiastic preacher, he didn't demand anything for himself personally. He used to come to Krishna Bhavan, and he would shop with an old banger, and he'd leave with a motorhome, because he's always convinced, or then a leader, that just by his enthusiasm and by his track record, to give something substantial for his service. And then there used to be the laundry room at Bhaktivedanta Manor, probably Hoxha remembers it. Laundry room, just concrete floor, big industrial washing machines and dryers. And he came back very late. As was typical, he would be the last one to be finished doing service. He came back very late and everything was closed up. So he just went to sleep in the laundry room floor, just lying there in the concrete floor. And the devotees seen him and just started crying because they could see, that he was just so devoted and he wasn't caring, what was there, he just accepted. And then at other occasions, then perhaps he would be put into nice facilities, but whatever facilities were there or not there, then his dedication to serving his spiritual master, and even at the end of his life, then Giridhari asked him, he was with him. Yeah, so devotees said, why don't you go to Vrindavan? He says, I don't want to go there with devotees all fussing around me. So he went somewhere else. He went to Brazil, and he was in some hospital or something there. And he says to me, so are you going to go back to Godhead? He says, I just want to go where Prabhupada is. Wherever he is, that's where I want to go. And he had a big picture of Prabhupada, and he passed away with that big picture of Prabhupada in front of him. So this is a living example in our times of someone who's very satisfied with whatever came his way. And if he had no facility, he had the mood of pioneering. If he had no facility, then he would just try to create some facility. So it was him and Kishore who came to Scotland, and under the order of Prabhupada, and they were just going door to door saying, my spiritual master has sent me here to open a temple. Can we use your house? This is what they were doing. And finally, some guy says, well, I've got a spare bedroom. You can use that. So they were having Sunday programs in this guy's bedroom. This was how they did it. And also, I remember he was, there was one devotee, you should travel with me. He listened to a lot of Tribhuvannath lectures, and he also served with them. And he was looking forward to going traveling to Russia with him. And so this would have been back in the early 2000s. Russia had already opened up, but still there was quite a lot of challenges. So he was supposed to be going to a particular place to preach, and then he got a call to go to Africa because he did a lot of preaching there. And he says to this other devotee, I'll just go. You just go. He says, I don't speak the language. And he says, I'll just go. Krishna will help you. So that was his mood. Prabhupada gave that mood to them. Just go and put yourself in that position, and Krishna will help you. He's obliged to help if the devotees put himself in a situation in his name. So this is what this preaching movement does. It gives us that opportunity to jump in the deep end and depend on Krishna. And the results of that frontline preaching also have to be managed. So there's a requirement. If everybody just goes out and we have no temples, then how are we going to cultivate people? So we have to have facilities for cultivating them. So, but that's what they have to be for. They're not, Prabhupada says, they're not places where people just eat and sleep. They then end up quarreling with each other. So we have to be focused on frontline preaching, or other types of preaching, so many different types of preaching, and managing and serving the infrastructure which supports that. Devotees need a place to live, they need a place to worship. So this is our great fortune. And so the devotees actually, because they're unattached, they don't think, when they go traveling, they don't think, oh, this is terrible. They might think, well, it's uncomfortable, but we're here for a mission, we'll accept it. Sometimes the devotees do that. Even recently we've seen some of the devotees went traveling and they accepted some situations which were not very clean. And they tried to avoid these situations They accept them at the time so as not to upset the hosts. And sometimes they have nice facilities which are maybe even enviable in a materialistic way. But the devotees have a higher knowledge. They don't become attached to someone else's opulence. They don't become repulsed by someone else's lack of standard. They just see it for what it is. And we accept what comes our way in devotional service. That's the main thing. As long as the devotional service is there, then the devotees can be satisfied. So we'll just stop there. Anyone get any questions or comments? Ishant Prabhu. Well, the first thing you should do is follow Prabhupada's instruction, which means to put glass in your shoes if you're looking for austerities. So my understanding is that we don't go looking for austerities, because if we go looking for austerities, then we can become proud, I'm more austere. We compare ourselves to others. I'm more austere than this one. That one's just a Vishayi, they're just a sense enjoyer. And so that is the danger of becoming hard-hearted and proud by too much austerity. So what is too much and what is too little? What do you think? It's a fact, yeah. Some people may enjoy taking a cold bath, and some people may hate it, and they may never do it. There was a travelling party, and I wasn't on this particular party. It was before my time, but I heard about it. They had this big articulated lorry. It was called Palace on Wheels, and it was a beautiful temple. And one of the devotees, when he was taking the cold, because they had cold bucket, they had cold shower actually. That was the standard back in the day, cold shower. And he'd be taking the shower and he'd be banging on the walls and like yelling and things like that, as if he was really suffering. But he came out dry. He was just, he was faking it. He was miming a cold shower. I think after a few days, they probably realized he wasn't taking a bath at all. But for him, it was just too much for his mind. He didn't give up, but you can understand, if by forcing someone into an austerity they can't continue in devotional service, then austerity is not conducive. So, yeah, that's a good point that different people have got different thresholds for austerity, and some things may be austere for others, but not for another, and vice versa. So for some people to give up a certain thing, it might be easy. For others, it might not be easy. But the austerity which we have to, many different austerities, but these are listed in Bhagavad Gita, austerities of speech, etc., which is pleasing, beneficial to others, and truthful. So we have to balance that out. If by being truthful, it's not pleasing to others, then we shouldn't just go and say, I'm just going to tell you the truth, Prabhu. So many things go on in the name of, I'm just speaking truthfully. Well, that's fine. Are you ready to take it as much as you're willing to give it? We had one devotee who said, "Oh, you can give me as heavy as you like. I can take it." I says, "Don't say that," because we could see that the person, they may be thinking they could, they may even in their own mind thinking that they wanted to hear it and take it, but Prabhupada says, "If I tell you everything," what was it saying now? "If I tell you everything all at once, you'd faint." So that's the kindness of the spiritual master. He'll see things, but he won't necessarily say it straight away. So we're not in a position where as soon as we see something, we're just intolerant and just hit somebody with it. And this is the thing that two devotees went complaining to Prabhupada, and he said, this is your austerity. You have to tolerate each other. It's your austerity. So this is natural. And there's an example here in Krishna where two devotees who were like chalk and cheese. One you could say would be like the bourgeoisie, and the other the proletariat. And they were living in the same motorhome for years. And on account of having Krishna consciousness as the common denominator and being in situations where they had to surrender, in that surrender together, that common denominator brought mutual respect. Although in the material world, they'd never have stayed in the same room, there would have been a fight. But they have respect for each other. So this is the thing, tolerate as we want to be tolerated. We think that we have to tolerate, but people are having to tolerate us too. We might not know how they're having to tolerate, and we might think, well, that's your problem if you think you have to tolerate me. You know, that would be proud to think that we're perfect, we don't need to be tolerated. So tolerate with the understanding that this is for Krishna's pleasure, that we cooperate for Krishna's pleasure, and if we can't figure out what to cooperate on, then speak to someone else. So the austerities we accept in the course of doing our duty, just like that's given in the Bhagavad Gita, that the duty of the cook, even in the hottest months of the year in India, is still to cook. It's not like it was too hot, I can't cook, I can't go in the kitchen. And then also in the coldest months, it's the duty to take a bath. If we have to take a cold bath in the winter months, then we have to do it. You know, as a Brahmin, for example, you have to be clean, or even as a human. So some austerities are unavoidable, and we should accept that, but we don't have to go looking. You know, although at the same time, Prabhupada says eating, sleeping, mating, defending, we should gradually reduce to zero. So if we want to make some progress on that, make sure we do it in bite sizes. Is that okay? Anyone can offer something on that?
Desires for basic necessities of life, things we look at you from anybody, so our permissible and good ability to set. This must be the case since the Lord is an instrument we really should note, however, that desires for excess or luxury do not apply to the definition of good purpose. However, since each condition is so much unique, and each devotee has a different service, what constitutes excess for one person may not be excess for another. This too should be followed.
Yeah, very good point. Okay, so we shouldn't be neglectful. Just in that point that the body is used in the service of the Lord. It's just like we use a car in the service of the Lord. We don't think, well, I'm going to be austere and not put any oil and water in it. You would be austere. You'd be broken down and walking home from the 40 miles away along the hard shoulder. So similar with the body, there's no need to do extra austerities. But that point there has been made that austerity and capacity for enjoyment or luxury or whatever is different for different people. The main thing is not to be distracted in our duties. Okay, we could speak longer, but I've went over too much. So, Iskon Gurvinda Ki, Srimad Prabhupada Ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhavagatam Ki, Tagore Premanande. Go back to Vrinda Ki.